Hey, vinyl community, Jeff here, and we are talking 1980. This is a part of my ongoing series of 10 great albums from my, in this case, really, my vinyl collection is the way I'm approaching this. Seeing other people do this, this is basically not so much a top 10 of all times, because I'm basing it on the albums that I actually have in my vinyl collection, and that's the limit of where we're going. So this is 10 great albums, sort of ranked, that I actually own. Now, I started in 77, briefly, if you didn't see those, because that was really the first age year that I actually started buying records myself. Somewhere in late 77, early 80s. The 77 years, the stuff that I was buying in 78, 77 or 78. In that time frame, so that's where we started. We're up to 1980 now. Wow, what a year! This is a year that a lot of main named bands got their start. Bands that we still to this day follow, and I was surprised. So I had to really look hard. There were a couple that I had to leave off. I mean, top 20 would have been great. There were that many great albums, and so I picked the top 10. And the orders may change depending on the day, I feel like. But I got them in an order that I feel is good. So let's jump right into this. I have to bring this up. You know, Adam and the Ants, King of the Wild Frontier. This is where I discovered Adam and the Ants. It was only later that I discovered there was a first album, etc. Went into that. But this, when this was out, it had videos on MTV. And I was sold. And this, and then Prince Charming came, you know. But this album to me still is one that I listen to frequently. This is the box set that came out a couple years ago. Nice foil box. It's got the vinyl reissue in here, a bunch of CDs and stuff like that. I've shown videos on this before. So I had to bring Adam and the Ants in because at the time he was very much a mainstay in my early hard rock world. Next up, Permanent Waves by Rush. Now, yes, Moving Pictures is got a lot of the big hits, but this is the one that they played on the radio a lot when I was growing up. This is the one where I think I pretty much discovered them. You know, Spirit of Radio, all of that stuff. This is just Free Will. This is just one that I recall having back in the day and playing all the time. This and Moving Pictures, I think, maybe it's just a nostalgia, but I still think are probably my top two albums by them. I mean, they've got a lot of great stuff. But I think nostalgia and memories bring me back to bringing those two up all the time. On Through the Night by Def Leppard, their first album. Now, like I said, there's a lot of bands in here that made their first in 1980. Now, I admit I did not know this album in 1980. High and Dry was the first album I discovered them by. Later went back to that. Not really later, really around the same time, picked up on this one. Absolutely one of their, in my opinion, one of their best albums. Maybe not their best selling, but this is a young and hungry, raw energy rock band. Forget, you know, if you're not, I'm sure you're familiar with them. These, come on, everybody knows this album. But, you know, if you move on into the days when they went really on the radio hits and the pop and all the stuff that's still on the radio today, then this is totally different than that. This is a rock band, straight up, guitar driven, hard rockin', great stuff. This and High and Dry, Pyromania, it's a different band. It's a different band. It's a different sound. And those three albums are absolutely way up there in my rankings. This especially, even me and the guitar player in my band, we're all the time busting into songs that are just like riffs from this Wasted. He would love to play Wasted. Songs from this album that, you know, you wonder, would the audience know as much because they're not the huge Def Leppard hits. So we, at last, do not play them in our band. But, all right. Michael Schenker was not a new name, but the Michael Schenker Band was a new band and his first album. Again, I did not know this album in 1980. I discovered him with the second album, just called MSG. Still to this day, probably one of my favorite albums. This is a close second because these are the songs that we cut our teeth on when it came to Schenker in the early days. This is, you know, the Live at Budokan album, still one of my absolute favorite live albums, and it has all the songs from these early first two albums. So those are always going to be ingrained in my mind. The Gary Barden years, I'm a big Gary Barden singer version of the band. He's had a lot of singers over the years. Gary has just, to me, because of the early years, it's just the one that's most concrete and cemented in my mind. And yeah, so had the second album, went back and got the first album. I remember having this in the early 80s and listening to it all the time. It was absolutely always being played. Now, I'm going to bring in a twofer. Two from Saxon. One came out in like early February of 1980, and then like November of 1980. So here's a new band. They had one album out. First album, it was good, but I think they really found their stride when they hit up with Wheels of Steel. This went on to be, it's still to this day, Motorcycle Man, and a lot of these songs from this album are still just essential for them to play in concert. And then they went back, so they go in the studio in like, this was released in May. They go in the studio in February, they record an album, they release it in May, they go back in the studio in like, through August, and they put this out in November. So 2 albums. This is a young band just working hard to churn out 2 very pivotal albums, and Heavy Metal Thunder. There's Strong Arm of the Law. These are just Dallas 1 p.m. 20,000 feet. This was a great start. This took them to the next level. These are the hits that you find everywhere they play. These are still just pivotal songs. I actually discovered the band on the next album, Denim and Leather, which would probably make my next top 10 if I don't get bumped by that. That's the album that I discovered them on and went back and found these, and these are just, mainstays in the collection ever since. Not a first by a band, but really, to me, where it really changed sounds, really kind of became what we understand the Judas Priest to be. Not that the previous album wasn't like that, but I think that you get into this, you're getting into Breaking the Law, Metal Gods, and Living After Midnight. This is where they really started. You started seeing the videos, you started hearing them more and more on the radio side, and this is where we start getting that Judas Priest sound that is later, the next couple albums was really solid, and then they got some stuff in there, but I love all the Judas Priest stuff, but this to me is one of the key moments in their career. And it's the first Iron Maiden album. I admit I am more of a Bruce Dickinson fan, but you cannot, lay these albums low. The first 2 albums are excellent. Paul Di'Anno, I love his stuff that he's done after Maiden. He is a powerhouse. I love the stuff with him, but I do, I did get into Iron Maiden a little more in the Bruce Dickinson years. So again, that kind of ties your brain to that era more. But absolutely classics on the first and second album. And this has to be in there, higher up there, because Iron Maiden are still a mainstay to this day. A great band. Again, not a first, but a first after a change. AC/DC's Back in Black. This is where I discovered them. I admit, I wasn't into the Bon Scott years back in the day. I discovered them at this point. I do remember in the record store scene when Dirty Deeds came out on vinyl. I think it came out around the same time this did. They were reissuing it, and it was a big deal, and I didn't quite understand it in my youth. But anyway, this is the album that still, it's just chock full of hits. This and For Those About to Rock are albums. Those are the ones you hear on the radio all the time, a lot the most. This is the one spawned Hell's Bells and all of that. It is, and I understand this is one of the biggest selling albums, I believe. One of the biggest selling hard rock albums still. Great stuff. Absolutely top notch. Aussies Blizzard of Oz. This is interesting in conjunction with the next one, but Ozzy's Out of Sabbath. I admit I wasn't much into the Sabbath stuff in the 70s. I discovered Ozzy in the Ozzy years, and I probably didn't discover him even until Diary of a Madman, I think. I remember Diary of a Madman and Blizzard of Oz being 2 albums in our collection all the time, but I'm thinking it was the Diary of a Madman when I first started listening to him. So you've got the 2 albums with Randy Rhoads. You've got, just all-star albums. Great songs. Still to this day, so many hits on here. Crazy Train, played it last night with the band. Played it last night. these albums are ingrained into my mind so much, these first two albums for sure, that this is high up there on my list. And yeah, it actually is number 2. The number 1 album, I think, for 1980 is going to be the flip side, the non-Aussie Black Sabbath era. This is where we really got our first real taste of what Dio can do, you know, with more of a hard rock and metal band. Love his stuff with Rainbow, love his stuff with Elf, you know, but you could see the progression as he went through that to where he comes in full force as this, only to next with his solo albums after these Sabbath years went on to just become the voice of heavy metal for most of us at that time frame. So absolutely top notch. Now Mob Rules may rank a little higher, but hey, this is the 1980 for me. This is like one of the top albums of 1980. I think I probably discovered more Mob Rules and then went back to this one, I believe, or maybe they run the same time for me. Anyway, absolutely love it. Great stuff. And that is it. 10 great albums, sort of ranked from my collection from 1980. There are a lot of great releases in 1980. I couldn't fit them all. There's a lot of great releases that I don't even own on vinyl, and that's what I'm limiting myself to, so could be getting better in the future. Anyway, thanks for watching. Rock on and rock hard.